What if the real monster isn't hiding in the dark, but spreading quietly through the air, the water, even our words? Tonight, we're stepping into a world where fear has a pulse, and survival is never guaranteed. These classic horror films explore mysterious plagues and strange diseases that turn ordinary life into a waking nightmare. As you watch, ask yourself, how long would you last? If you enjoy chilling stories like these, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss the next descent into horror. 1. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. A mysterious object falls from the sky. And within hours, an entire town is wiped out, except for 2 survivors who shouldn't have lived at all. Why? At first, it feels almost quiet, too quiet. A small New Mexico town goes about its day, unaware that something microscopic, cold, and utterly alien has just arrived. No roaring monsters, no screaming crowds, just silence, followed by death. The Andromeda Strain doesn't rush to scare you. It waits, and that waiting is where the fear begins to crawl under your skin. This is a film that asks you to lean closer, to listen carefully. The enemy here has no face, no motive, no mercy. It doesn't hate humanity, it simply doesn't care. Scientists in sealed underground labs race against time, not just to stop the organism, but to understand it before it evolves beyond control. And as you watch them argue, calculate, and second-guess every decision, you start to feel the pressure yourself. What if they're wrong? What if logic fails? What makes the Andromeda Strain so unsettling is how real it feels. The procedures, the protocols, the endless layers of security, all meant to protect humanity, yet all terrifyingly fragile. One small mistake, one overlooked variable, one human flaw, that's all it takes. And suddenly, you're not watching a sci-fi horror anymore, you're imagining headlines, lockdowns, and empty streets that feel uncomfortably familiar. There's a creeping dread in realizing that intelligence doesn't guarantee survival. The smartest minds in the room are still guessing, still reacting, still human, and the film keeps asking you a silent question. If this happened today, would we really be ready? Or would we simply tell ourselves we are? Unlike loud, chaotic Outbreak films, this one chills you with restraint. The horror comes from observation, from watching life reduced to data points and blinking monitors. You're not scared because something jumps out at you. You're scared because nothing does. The threat is invisible, unstoppable, and already inside the system. And when the film finally reveals how close humanity comes to erasing itself, not by malice, but by procedure, it leaves you uneasy in a very specific way. Not panicked, thoughtful, disturbed. So let me ask you, which is scarier to you, a monster you can see, or a disease that doesn't even know you exist? And do you trust science to save us, or does the Andromeda Strain make you question how thin that line really is? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how this one hits you. 2. Rabid, 1977. One woman survives an accident, and unknowingly becomes the source of a disease that turns desire into violence. Would you recognize the outbreak before it reaches you? It begins with pain, not panic. A brutal motorcycle crash, a desperate experimental surgery, and a body that heals wrong. Rabid doesn't scream its horror at you. It lets it seep out slowly. Through touch, through hunger, through impulses people don't want to admit they have. David Cronenberg invites you into a world where the disease isn't just biological, it's intimate. Rose wakes up change, though no one can quite explain how. She looks human, she sounds human, but something inside her now needs to feed. Not metaphorically, literally. And the truly disturbing part isn't what she becomes, it's how easily she blends back into society while carrying death with her. Every encounter feels charged, every moment of closeness feels dangerous. The film quietly asks you, how much do we trust appearances? As the infection spreads, the city begins to unravel, not with grand speeches or dramatic warnings, but with confusion, sirens, rumors, sudden violence in places that once felt safe. Watching this, you feel the dread of not knowing where the threat is coming from, or who's already infected. Is it the stranger next to you? Or the person you love? What makes Rabid linger in your mind is its unsettling mix of body horror and emotional distance. People aren't just attacked, they're altered. Their humanity slips away piece by piece, replaced by raw instinct. And Cronenberg never lets you forget that this outbreak started with an attempt to save a life. A medical miracle becomes a societal collapse. Progress turns predatory. There's something deeply uncomfortable about how quiet the film often feels. No heroic scientists racing against time. No clear solution. Just authorities losing control and ordinary people caught in the middle, trying to understand a threat that doesn't follow rules. It feels less like fiction and more like a warning whispered too late. And Rose herself remains a tragic figure. She's not a villain plotting destruction, she's a symptom. A walking question mark. As viewers, we're left torn between fear and pity. And that tension is where Rabid does its most lasting damage. Can you hate someone who never chose to be the carrier? So here's the question I want you to think about. Is the real horror in Rabid the disease itself? Or the way human connection becomes the perfect delivery system for it? And if you were there, would you notice the signs, or would you already be too close? Share your thoughts in the comments. This one always sparks debate. 3. Shivers, 1975. A luxury apartment promises comfort and safety, until a parasite turns pleasure into panic. Would you stay, or run, knowing the threat is already inside? At first glance, the building feels like a dream. Clean hallways, polite neighbors, a self-contained paradise where everything you need is just an elevator ride away. That's what makes Shivers so deeply unsettling. It traps horror inside a place designed to protect you. And once the doors close, there's nowhere to escape. The infection doesn't arrive with explosions or warnings. It slips in quietly, through the most private parts of human life. A parasite, engineered with intention, awakens urges people barely control even on their best days. Desire becomes compulsive, affection becomes aggression, and suddenly, the walls that once felt safe start to feel unbearably thin. You can hear your neighbors. You can feel them getting closer. What makes Shivers linger is how personal it feels. This isn't about strangers in hazmat suits or distant outbreaks on the news. This is about everyday people, couples, families, lonely residents, losing themselves from the inside out. The film watches calmly as social order dissolves. Not because of fear, but because of craving. And that idea alone is disturbing. What happens when the thing spreading fastest isn't terror, but pleasure? As viewers, we're placed in an uncomfortable position. You're not just afraid of the infected, you're afraid of recognizing pieces of yourself in them. Cronenberg forces you to confront the idea that civilization is a thin layer, easily peeled back. When rules disappear, what really holds us together? Morality, habit, or just the hope that we'll never be pushed too far? The apartment complex becomes a living organism, pulsing with movement, whispers, and hunger. Elevators feel like traps. Corridors feel like veins. Every encounter is charged with uncertainty. Is this person still themselves, or have they already surrendered? And the scariest part is that no one looks obviously sick. There are no clear signs. No safe distance. Unlike traditional outbreak films, Shivers doesn't offer comfort. There's no cure you can cling to. No reassuring voice telling you help is coming. The infection spreads because people let it, or maybe because they can't stop it. And that ambiguity stays with you long after the film ends. So let me ask you this. Is Shivers terrifying because of the parasite, or because it suggests how easily society might collapse if our instincts were set loose? And if you lived in that building, hearing the sounds through the walls, would you lock your door? Or would curiosity get the better of you? I'd love to hear how this one made you feel. Drop your thoughts in the comments. 4. Outbreak, 1995. A deadly virus jumps from jungle to small-town America, and suddenly, survival depends on who you trust when panic spreads faster than the disease. What would you do first? It starts far away, somewhere you don't feel connected to. A jungle, a camp, a few soldiers, easy to ignore. But Outbreak knows how fear really works. It brings the danger closer, inch by inch, until it's standing right in the middle of an ordinary town that looks a lot like yours. That's when the film tightens its grip and doesn't let go. You can feel the tension build as doctors, military officials, and politicians collide, each carrying a different version of the right decision. Science demands time, authority demands control, and civilians? They just want answers. Watching this unfold feels like being trapped in a room where everyone is talking, but no one is listening. The virus doesn't care about debates. It moves, it adapts, it spreads. What makes Outbreak unsettling isn't just the sickness, it's the moment when help starts to feel dangerous. Quarantines turn into cages, protection starts to look a lot like sacrifice, and the question quietly creeping into your mind is terrifyingly simple. At what point does saving the many justify abandoning the few? The film never asks this outright, but you feel it in every urgent glance and every shouted order. There's a raw, almost claustrophobic energy as the town locks down. Streets empty, fear fills the silence, and suddenly, everyday actions, touching a door handle, coughing in public, standing too close, feel like acts of defiance. You can't help but imagine yourself there, watching soldiers roll in, wondering whether they're here to save you or erase the problem entirely. Unlike colder, more clinical Outbreak films, Outbreak leans hard into emotion. Friendships strain under pressure, loyalties blur, and amid the chaos, the virus becomes more than a biological threat, it becomes a test of character. Who keeps their humanity when fear takes over? Who doesn't? And then there's the race against time. Not the flashy kind, but the desperate kind where every second lost means more invisible transmissions. More lives quietly ticking away. The suspense doesn't come from what you see, it comes from what you can't. An unseen enemy, already ahead of you. By the time the film reaches its final act, you're left with a lingering unease. Not relief, not comfort, just the realization that systems meant to protect us can fracture under pressure, and when they do, ordinary people are caught in the middle. So here's my question for you. In a situation like Outbreak, who would you trust more, scientists searching for truth, or leaders making hard calls for survival? And if the quarantine line was drawn at your door, would you accept it? Let me know in the comments. This one hits differently every time. 5. The Crazies, 1973. One contaminated water supply is all it takes to turn neighbors into threats, if the people you trust lose their minds. Where do you run? Imagine waking up in a town that looks exactly the same as yesterday, same streets, same faces, but something feels off. A pause that lasts too long. A smile that doesn't mean what it used to. The Crazies creeps in like that, slowly replacing comfort with suspicion until you realize the danger isn't approaching from outside. It's already here. The infection doesn't create monsters in the traditional sense. There are no fangs, no grotesque mutations. Instead, it strips away restraint, patience, reason. People don't transform overnight, they unravel. And watching that unraveling is deeply disturbing. Because it feels possible, you start to ask yourself how thin the line really is between calm and chaos. How much pressure does it take before anyone breaks? As panic spreads, authority steps in, but not gently. Soldiers arrive, masks on, weapons ready, treating the town like a problem to be contained rather than people to be saved. And suddenly, you're caught between two nightmares. The neighbors who may turn violent without warning, and the forces meant to protect you who might decide you're expendable. Which one do you fear more? What makes the Crazies hit so hard is its sense of moral confusion. There are no clean choices, no easy heroes. Every decision feels wrong in some way, and the film refuses to reassure you that things will be okay. Instead, it watches as fear spreads faster than the disease itself. Rumors ignite violence, mistrust poisons relationships, and survival becomes less about doing the right thing and more about doing anything. The film has a raw, almost documentary-like tension. You feel the dirt, the sweat, the panic in every scene. It's not polished, it's not comforting. It feels like something you weren't meant to witness. Like peeking behind the curtain of civilization and seeing how fragile it really is. And once you've seen that, it's hard to unsee. There's a haunting question running beneath the surface the entire time. When people lose control, who becomes more dangerous, the infected, or the ones holding the guns? The Crazies doesn't answer that for you. It leaves you sitting with the discomfort, forcing you to examine your own instincts. Would you comply? Would you resist? Or would fear push you to do something you never thought you were capable of? By the end, there's no sense of victory, only exhaustion. The kind that comes from realizing how quickly order can collapse, and how easily, becomes them. So I'll ask you this. If your town was sealed off overnight, would you trust your neighbors, or would you be watching them for signs of change? And when authority knocks on your door, would you feel safer opening it, or locking it shut? Share your thoughts below. This one always sparks uncomfortable honesty. 6. Contagion, 2011, one cough, one handshake, one moment of carelessness, and suddenly the world is holding its breath. How far would fear travel before you even realized you were infected? This story doesn't creep in from the shadows. It walks straight through airports, offices, kitchens, and bedrooms. Contagion begins with something almost boringly normal, a business trip, a casual touch, a quiet flight home, and that's exactly why it's terrifying. There's no warning music telling you danger is near. Life just keeps moving, until it doesn't. As the illness spreads, the film feels less like a movie and more like a mirror held uncomfortably close. You watch everyday routines turn suspicious. A doorknob becomes a threat. A shared drink feels reckless. And slowly, a sense of invisible paranoia settles in. You start counting touches, faces, distances. Without realizing it, the movie trains you to fear the ordinary. What makes Contagion hit so hard is its emotional distance. The virus doesn't announce itself with drama, it arrives quietly, efficiently, and without mercy. People disappear from the story as suddenly as they disappear from life. No speeches, no goodbyes, just absence. And that coldness leaves a mark. It forces you to confront how fragile our sense of control really is. There's a strange loneliness at the heart of this film. Even when surrounded by others, everyone feels isolated, physically, emotionally, morally. Trust becomes currency. Misinformation spreads alongside the disease, faster than truth can keep up. Watching this unfold, you begin to wonder what's more dangerous, the virus itself, or the stories people tell to survive it. The film never asks you to panic, but it doesn't let you relax either. Instead, it pulls you into a constant state of unease. You feel the weight of waiting. Waiting for symptoms, waiting for answers, waiting for someone to say it's over. And as days stretch into months, hope becomes something fragile, easily broken by a headline or a rumor. What lingers most isn't fear, it's recognition. You recognize the behaviors, the denial, the anger, the desperate need for certainty in a world that refuses to give it. And suddenly, you're not watching characters anymore. You're watching versions of yourself. How you might act, what you might believe, who you might blame. By the end, Contagion doesn't feel like it ends, it just stops, leaving you with a quiet question that echoes long after the screen goes dark. Not, what if this happened? But, what if it happens again? So I want to know, did Contagion scare you because it felt extreme, or because it felt familiar? And when fear spreads faster than facts, how do you decide what to believe? Share your thoughts below. This one always opens a conversation worth having. 7. Pontypool, 2008. A late-night radio show becomes the last line of defense when language itself turns deadly. Would you stop speaking if words could infect you? It begins with a voice in the dark. Snow falling outside. Static humming through the airwaves. Pontypool traps you inside a small-town radio station where nothing looks wrong, until meaning starts to fracture. This isn't an outbreak you can see. It's one you hear, and once you realize what's happening, it's already too late to unlisten. As the DJ talks, jokes, fills the silence, reports begin to drift in, confused, half-formed, impossible to verify. Something violent is happening beyond the studio walls. People are repeating words, fixating on phrases, turning on each other with frightening calm. The more you listen, the more you feel the danger tightening around your own tongue. The film dares you to lean in, even as it warns you that attention itself might be the trigger. What makes Pontypool unforgettable is its restraint. There are no sweeping shots of chaos, no comforting cutaways. You're locked in with voices, sounds, and imagination. And imagination does the heavy lifting. Every scream you don't see becomes sharper. Every report you can't confirm becomes more terrifying. The horror blooms in the gap between what's said and what's understood. Language, something we rely on to connect, to explain, to survive, becomes a weapon. A virus carried not by blood or breath, but by meaning. The idea crawls under your skin. What if communication itself is the problem? What if the thing that binds us together is also what destroys us? As words lose their safety, silence starts to feel like the only refuge, and even that feels temporary. The characters cling to routine because routine feels like control. They keep talking because stopping feels like death. And you, listening, feel complicit. You want updates. You want clarity. But every word risks spreading the infection further. It's a cruel tension, curiosity versus survival. How much do you need to know before knowing becomes lethal? There's a strange intimacy here. The radio host speaks as if he's talking directly to you, because he is. You're not just an observer, you're part of the broadcast. The film turns the audience into participants, daring you to consider your own relationship with words. How often do we repeat things without understanding them? How often do we pass along meaning without questioning its impact? By the time the truth begins to surface, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a dare, a challenge to rethink the most basic human act, speaking. And when the film finally falls silent, that silence is deafening. So let me ask you, if words themselves became dangerous, what would you choose, silence or connection? And how long do you think you could last without speaking at all? Share your thoughts in the comments. Pontypool isn't just watched, it's listened to. And it stays with you long after the signal fades. 8. Perfect Sense. 2011. The world isn't ending with screams or fire, it's ending quietly. One sense at a time. If you knew you were about to lose how you feel, taste, or hear, what would you hold on to last? It starts with confusion, not fear. People wake up unable to smell. Chefs stare at plates that suddenly mean nothing. Lovers hesitate, unsure why something essential feels missing. Perfect sense doesn't rush toward panic, it drifts there. Gently, heartbreakingly, like a song fading note by note. And that softness is exactly what makes it devastating. As the disease spreads, humanity doesn't collapse all at once. It adapts, poorly, desperately. Each lost sense triggers a wave of emotional fallout, rage, grief, numbness. Like the body mourning itself in stages. Watching this feels uncomfortably intimate. Because the film isn't asking how society survives. It's asking how you would. At the center of the story is a fragile connection between two people trying to love each other while the rules of existence quietly rewrite themselves. Their relationship becomes a refuge, then a test. When taste disappears, meals become memory. When hearing fades, silence becomes permanent. And through it all, love struggles to stay recognizable. Can intimacy survive when sensation itself is stripped away? What makes Perfect Sense linger is its refusal to sensationalize the apocalypse. There are no riots burning through the streets, no villains to blame, just people lining up to be told what they've lost next. Parents trying to comfort children without knowing how. Strangers clinging to touch because it might be the last thing left. The horror isn't loud, it's tender. And that tenderness cuts deep. The film quietly asks an unbearable question. If everything that stimulates us disappears, what remains of who we are? Without flavor, sound, or touch, do emotions still matter? Or do they fade too? You start watching faces more closely than events. Noticing how people smile out of habit, cry without sound, and cling to rituals long after their meaning is gone. There's something profoundly human in the way the characters refuse to give up connection. Even as their world narrows, they fall in love harder. They laugh louder while they still can. They grieve in advance. And you, watching, feel a strange pressure in your chest, an urge to appreciate things you usually ignore. Breathing, listening, feeling another person close. By the final moments, the film doesn't leave you terrified. It leaves you quiet, reflective, almost grateful, because it reminds you that horror doesn't always come to destroy, it sometimes comes to reveal what matters before it's gone. So let me ask you this, if you had warning, which sense would you fear losing the most, and which one do you take for granted right now? And do you think love could survive in a world without sensation? Or is feeling everything part of what makes us human? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. This film tends to stay with people in very personal ways. 9. The Bay, 2012. A quiet coastal town celebrates a holiday, until the water turns against them. If the sea itself was poisoning your home, How long would it take before you believed it? It begins with sunshine, laughter, and the comfort of routine. A seaside community gathers to celebrate, trusting the water that has always sustained them. Fishing boats drift calmly, families swim without fear, and that sense of normalcy is exactly what the bay uses to pull you in before it tightens the noose. Because when things start to go wrong, they don't feel cinematic, they feel dismissible. Strange rashes appear, people complain of itching, nausea, fever, nothing dramatic enough to shut everything down, nothing urgent enough to stop the celebration. And watching this unfold is agonizing. Because you recognize the instinct immediately: minimize, rationalize, move on. The film traps you inside that dangerous delay, the space between something's wrong and it's too late. What makes The Bay so disturbing is how it tells its story. Through fragmented footage, emergency calls, news clips, personal recordings that were never meant to be evidence. You're not watching events as they happen, you're piecing together a disaster from the remains. And that distance makes it feel real, like a tragedy reconstructed after everyone stopped listening. The horror doesn't come from monsters rising out of the water. It comes from neglect, from environmental damage ignored for too long, from decisions made far away that quietly poison a place people call home. As the sickness worsens, bodies betray themselves in shocking ways. But the true dread lies in the realization that this wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. There's a sickening intimacy to the fear here. This isn't about a virus spreading across continents, it's about neighbors collapsing on their own streets. Children suffering while adults argue about causes. Officials hesitating because admitting the truth would mean admitting guilt. And you, watching, feel the frustration build. How many signs do we need before we act? Unlike films that rely on spectacle, The Bay makes you feel helpless by design. You don't get a hero with answers. You don't get a clear moment where everything changes. You get confusion, panic, silence when there should be warnings. And that silence is deafening. The water keeps flowing, people keep drinking it, life continues, until it can't. By the end, the town feels like a ghost story told by survivors who wish someone had believed them sooner. The film leaves you uneasy not because of what you've seen, but because of what you recognize. We trust systems. We trust infrastructure. We trust that someone is paying attention. The Bay asks, what if no one is? So let me ask you this: if you lived there, at what point would you have stopped trusting the water? And when experts tell you everything is under control, do you listen? Or do you look closer? Share your thoughts in the comments. This one doesn't just scare you, it makes you suspicious. And that feeling lingers long after the screen goes dark. 10. Carriers, 2009, when the world is already lost. Survival becomes a choice, and sometimes that choice costs your humanity. If staying alive meant abandoning someone you love, could you do it? There's no outbreak montage here. No moment when alarms go off and the world realizes it's ending. Carriers begins after all of that, when hope has already thinned out and the road stretches empty in every direction. Civilization isn't collapsing anymore, it's gone, and what's left is quieter, colder, and far more uncomfortable. The story follows a small group traveling through a sun-bleached landscape, clinging to strict rules they believe will keep them alive. No contact, no risks, no exceptions. At first, those rules feel logical, necessary, even. But as the miles pass, you start to feel their weight. Survival here isn't heroic, it's cautious, suspicious, and emotionally exhausting. Every interaction feels like a gamble. Every stranger feels like a threat. What makes Carriers so unsettling is how personal the danger becomes. The virus isn't just out there, it's a constant presence in every decision. Do you help someone who's hurt? Do you trust someone who looks healthy? Do you bend your own rules once? Just this once? The film watches these choices closely, and it never lets you forget that compassion can be fatal. There's a quiet cruelty to this world, not because people are evil, but because fear has narrowed their vision. You see relationships strain under the pressure of survival. Love becomes conditional, loyalty becomes negotiable, and as viewers, we're forced into an uncomfortable position. You understand the logic, even when it feels wrong. That's the real horror, recognizing yourself in decisions you'd like to believe you'd never make. Unlike louder post-apocalyptic films, Carriers keeps its horror intimate. Long stretches of silence, empty roads, tension simmering beneath casual conversation. You're constantly waiting for something to go wrong. And when it does, it feels inevitable rather than shocking. The virus doesn't need spectacle, it just needs time. The film asks a brutal question without ever saying it aloud. What does survival mean if it strips away everything that made life worth living? Is staying alive enough? Or is there a point where survival becomes another kind of loss? Watching the characters wrestle with this feels less like entertainment and more like an emotional test. By the end, Carriers doesn't give you relief. It gives you clarity, and that clarity hurts. You're left thinking about boundaries, about trust, about how thin the line is between self-preservation and selfishness. The world may be empty, but the moral weight is heavy. So let me ask you, in a world like Carriers, would you follow the rules no matter the cost, or would you risk everything for one moment of human connection? And if you survived, what part of yourself would you be leaving behind on the road? Share your thoughts in the comments. This one doesn't shout its horror, it whispers it. And that whisper stays with you. And after Carriers leaves us standing on that empty road, asking what survival is really worth, the list finally falls silent. Each film before it showed a different stage of the same nightmare, from the first strange symptom to the moment humanity starts turning on itself. And now I'm curious about you. Which of these stories unsettled you the most, and why? Would you survive by the rules? Or break them to stay human? If this journey pulled you in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next horror story is already waiting, and you won't want to face it alone.